Hi everybody, and welcome to Lesson 3.1, Population Ecology and Reproductive Strategies. The content in this video is aligned to the third edition of Environmental Science for AP and covers information from the College Board Units 3.1, 3.2, and 3.4. We've spent time so far looking at the resources that are available for use. Now we begin looking at the populations who are using those resources. Here is our content objective for this lesson. We want to look at how populations change over time in reaction to a variety of factors. Hopefully, at the end of this lesson, you should be able to do the following. Identify factors that contribute to population and community formation, describe carrying capacity, describe the impact of carrying capacity on ecosystems, describe how individuals or populations interact with one another, describe how organism interactions impact population growth, identify differences between generalist and specialist species, and identify differences between K and R selected species. All of this is designed to answer the question, why do populations look the way they do? The world around us is arranged in increasing levels of complexity. Everything from the individual to the ecosystem is going to play a role in affecting the biosphere. Right now, we're going to look at populations and communities. Remember that the biosphere is just an interconnection of multiple systems and subsystems that work together to sustain life. Our focus here will be on populations, communities, and population ecology. Population ecology is the study of how populations interact with one another and with their environment. A population is a group of organisms of the same species living in the same place. The community is a group of many different species living in the same place. Populations and communities will interact with each other in a variety of ways that produce changes, big and small, in their ecosystems. Let's shift and look at populations. How do we define or understand populations? And what are the characteristics we look at when exploring the impact a population has on its environment? There are 5 key factors that we look at. The first is size, often denoted by the uppercase N. This is the raw number of individuals in a population, either through counting them individually or, more expeditiously, by estimating population size using catch and release Lincoln indices. Size plays a large role in the second factor, density, which is the number of organisms living in a given area. It's most commonly given as the number of organisms per square kilometer or hectare. The third factor, distribution, is affected by both size and density. Distribution looks at the arrangement of organisms in the space of their ecosystem. Distribution can be uniform, random, or clumped. Uniform is often seen in organisms like penguins, who stand equidistant from each other. Random distribution is a common characteristic of wild plants, particularly those that move their seeds by wind dispersion. Clumped distribution is associated with resource availability and also organisms that are social by nature, such as elephants and great apes. Size, density, and distribution are the primary characteristics that determine population resource use. But we can also look at the sex and age demographics of a population. We evaluate the ratio of males to females in a population, as well as the proportion of pre-reproductive, reproductive, and post-reproductive individuals. This can help us to predict future population growth patterns. So how do we calculate population size and density? It's often impossible to count every single individual in a population. Instead, we use catch and release Lincoln indices to help us estimate the population size. The formula for the Lincoln index is N equals S sub 1 times S sub 2 divided by R. This is where S sub 1 is the original sample, all of which were marked or tagged in some way. S sub 2 is the second or a subsequent capture. And R is the number of marked or tagged individuals in that subsequent capture. Dividing by R helps to account for double counting of marked individuals. This can give an approximation of a population at any given time, but it can be heavily affected by migration. Density is much easier. It is simply the number of organisms divided by the area in question. Let's look at a sample problem. Assume that the original capture caught and marked 48 individuals. During a subsequent capture, 63 individuals were caught. Of that 63, 19 of them were marked as part of the original capture. So how do we figure out what the approximate population size is? We use our formula. We don't know N, but we do know S sub 1, S sub 2, and R. So we take 48 and multiply it by 63 and divide by 19. We end up with 159.2. To be safe, we always want to round up when we're talking about organisms or things that we can't have partial pieces of. So we would predict our population to be between 159 and 160 organisms. There are multiple factors that play into population growth. They are determined by an interplay of size, density, distribution, sex ratio, and age structure. Those factors also interact with the environment and the world around them. These interactions are categorized by either being density dependent or density independent factors. Density dependent factors are those that change based on the population size and distribution. These are mostly things that are acquired through competition, such as habitat, food, mates, water, and other limiting factors. Habitat, food, and mate availability are large contributors to biotic potential, which is the maximum rate of reproduction an organism has based on the environment, and fecundity, which is the successful reproduction rate of an individual. Another important factor is disease, which is highly impacted by population size, density, and distribution. Density-independent factors, on the other hand, are those that are out of the control of the population and will occur regardless of how many organisms there are in an area. These include atmospheric and geologic events such as climate and weather shifts, natural disasters, and things such as earthquakes or volcanoes. It also includes pesticide use, as humans often use pesticides regardless of how many organisms are present. All of these things are also predicated on the evolutionary adaptations of organisms. Over time, organisms adapted to their environment in ways that led them to demonstrate one of two growth patterns, exponential or logistic. Both are based on available resources in the environment, but they have very different reactions when those resources are overcome. For exponentially reproducing organisms who produce a J-shaped curve, they grow exponentially in the presence of abundant resources. However, when those resources are depleted, the population undergoes a crash that allows for resource replenishment. This common boom-bust cycle is common in bacteria and algae. Logistically reproducing organisms, which produce an S-shaped curve, are bound by what is known as the carrying capacity, or the maximum number of organisms an ecosystem can support. With early exponential growth in abundant resources, population growth slows as resources become more scarce. These populations may overshoot their carrying capacity, leading to a drop in population until it stabilizes around that carrying capacity. Exponential and logistic graphs are the visual representations of the R-selected and K-selected reproductive strategies. Organisms that are R-selected are ones that have a high rate of reproduction. They often have short lifespans, which means they have short maturity rates. They have many offspring events in a given reproductive cycle and produce many offspring. The offspring tends to be small and are able to survive on their own almost immediately. Their population typically grows quickly and is more affected by density-independent factors than density-dependent factors. Their population is very, very variable. We don't know exactly where they're going to land based on where they are because of their resource use. Organisms that are K-selected are ones that are dependent upon their carrying capacity to manage their populations. K-selected species have long lifespans, which also mean they have long reproductive maturity times. They're going to have fewer reproductive events per cycle and fewer offspring. Those offspring are also going to be large and are going to have parental care, leading them up to their time of maturity as well. They have a slow population growth rate, and they are more associated with density-dependent factors. K-selected species tend to have relatively stable populations, keeping them near their carrying capacities. Reproductive strategies are also related to the way in which an organism or species fits into their ecosystem. Species that are considered specialists are those that have a narrow niche, meaning they have a very small place within their ecosystem in which they can function. They are less adaptable because of those specialized needs and are more likely to become extinct. They use a specific set of resources that are easily affected by changing conditions and evolutionarily are more advantaged when ecosystems are constant. Specialist organisms are much more likely to be case-selected and demonstrate logistic growth. On the other side, species that are considered generalists have broad niches. They can live in much more wide characteristics. They're adaptable to many environments. They are less likely to become extinct because they can use a variety of resources. They have a very high range of tolerance for change, and they have the advantage when conditions change. They adapt very quickly. This is more likely to be an R-selected organism. Now, let me tell you about the symbionts. The way organisms interact with one another also plays a large role in reproduction as it impacts competition and resource use. The first thing is I want to make sure you understand symbiosis is a long-term interaction between two or more organisms or species. By definition, it is not always a beneficial interaction. Here you will see the multiple different types of organism interactions you're expected to know. The effects are identified as either being plus, where it is positive, negative, where it is detrimental, or zero, where there is no impact on that particular organism. Let's go through the list. Mutualism occurs when two organisms work together and both of them are benefited by the interaction. This is common in E. coli in the human gut. E. coli helps us break down plant materials, helps us get nutrients. The E. coli has a place to live and also gets nutrients on its own. Parasitism is a plus-negative interaction, where the parasite is helped, the host is harmed. For example, this is fleas on dogs. One of the things to think about is parasites tend to not kill their hosts because then they don't have a place to live. You also have predation or herbivory. These work the same way because they are a plus-minus interaction. The predator or the herbivore is benefited by eating the material, but the prey or the plant is detrimental for that. So examples of predation are lions eating gazelles or gazelles eating grass for herbivory. Commensalism occurs when one organism is helped, but the other is not affected at all. For example, we have cows walking through a field, and as they walk through the field, they kick up bugs from the grass. Birds can follow along behind those cows, and they can eat the bugs that pop up. The cows are in no way affected by this, but the birds get a good meal. Amensalism is the exact opposite. It's where one organism is harmed, but there's no effect on the second organism. This would be the bugs who are in the grass that are being stepped on by the walking cows. The bugs are getting 86ed. The cows don't really care. Then you have competition. Competition is the only real negative interaction that we see. And there are two types, interspecific and intraspecific. Interspecific competition is when organisms from two different species are competing for the same resource, such as lions and hyenas fighting for gazelle carcass. Intraspecific competition is when two members or two groups of the same population are fighting for a resource, such as two lion prides fighting for those gazelle carcasses. By looking at the interaction of symbiotic relationships in ecosystems, we can see that there are generally far more positives than there are negatives. Symbiotic relationships lead to balances in ecosystem services, and they can prevent overgrowth of particular populations, and they can stimulate coevolution, which leads to greater adaptability and greater genetic diversity. With resource partitioning, the ecosystems are much healthier than they would be without those interactions. However, these can lead to competitive exclusion, where one species or population is competed out of the area, and they either have to adapt, move, or die. It can also lead to some disruption, if the population sizes become skewed or something enters the population that was not there before, such as a new parasite. I want you to take a moment to look at the following slide, which provides you with an opportunity to see how some of these ideas are connected together. Feel free to pause the video and explore the connections between these topics. Then use the statements at the beginning of this presentation to review.